Vocation to love.
The General Quarters. Today we are pleased to have with us David Jenuwine from the Diocese of Saginaw to discuss his road to the priesthood. I assure you, Father Jenuwine's story is unique, and he's truly actually one of the most interesting guys I've ever, and I found his story fascinating. But first, a few points. If you like what we're talking about here, please pass this video along to friends and family. We're living in strange times, and we're fairly certain our message has been subject to shadow banning. And please hit the subscribe button, then the like button. If you'd like to be kept up to date on new content, make sure you hit the bell. Before we get started, it's important to point out we only exist because of strong Catholics like yourself who support us. If you can afford it, and you can afford it, please consider a donation to lepantoin.org/donate. That's lepantoin.org/donate. Okay, with that, let's get at it. Father, great to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, glad to be here, Jim. Glad to be here.
Great. We've gotten together several times over the last few months, and I've gotten to know you a little bit. And as I peel back the onion of your life story more and more, it was fascinating. A late ordination in life. Before that, you had a couple of engineering degrees, a stint in Naval Intelligence, learning Mandarin Chinese. There's a ton more as you just graduated from law school. So if you could, take us back. Can you just first start out by telling us briefly, where you grew up, your family, and from there we'll move over to your professional experience.
Sure. Pretty much grew up in metropolitan Detroit, different suburbs. Always, strangely enough, as things got worse in the inner city, further and further from it until we were out in the country. I'm the middle of 5 kids, 4 boys, and my sister is the oldest. And pretty much every one of us had some yen towards engineering. So we all went into engineering in one way, shape, or form, except my youngest brother, who probably is the only one of us who could actually use power tools and not kill himself, which is funny. So the one non-engineer is the one who's actually handy. The rest of us, my younger brother's a valedictorian. My mother's a valedictorian. My dad did the night school thing while we were growing up as kids. So we're all kind of somehow situated in engineering, or at least were for a while, or with the church, or in education, or something of that nature. So, but normal family, we built tree houses, fell out of trees. We rode bicycles all over the place. Growing up in the suburbs, there was always construction, so you took scrap wood and built something. We all know how to work on our cars to some extent, although now that everything's digital, it's not the easiest thing in the world.
Right.
And church was always part of it. We went to church on Sunday. And as we were getting older and could find our way around. In fact, I remember as a kid riding my bicycle when my bubble was enlarged, riding my bicycle to the very northern edge of as far as I could ride, and ending up in a monastery, Franciscan monastery. It was more of a retreat house, and wandering around there and just meeting this strange old man in a brown robe. And, he showed us around. And right before I went to college, I drove up there and bought a crucifix and an icon from that same old man. And then he passed away several years later when I found out he built it from nothing. He built the first retreat house. It's basically a monastery retreat house, and he built it. And every Station of the Cross that's in the woods on this trail, he built, he carved. He was the brains and the brawn and everything behind this place, and that's where they retired him to. And kid didn't know that. He was just this kind of strange dude in a brown robe. But it was connected in a certain sense with Father Solanus Casey. The cause for Casey's canonization kind of started in the 70s with the publication of the book, The Porter of St. Bonaventure. And My younger brother and I became members of the forget what they called it, the Father Solanus Casey Guild or something, which was, we were supposed to pray and we would get newsletters. But I read that book cover to cover and I said, wow, this is what I want. Now, unfortunately, the Capuchins and the Franciscans in the late 19th century, compared to, at this point, the church in the 1970s, were worlds apart.
Yes, right.
And at this point, we're kind of touching now on discernment, because when I went, we went before they dug him up, because when you're canonized, this is why nobody should want to be a saint. When you're canonized, they dig you up
to see if you're incorrupt.
No, they dig you up to take relics, to wash the body, to if there's a body left,
right.
to take inventory of the relics, make sure the person really is there. And so before they did that, my dad drove us to the headquarters of this place, which was down in the city of Detroit. And we were being given a tour. And it was this unbelievably beautiful church. The pews were oak, dark oak, because of how old they were. The choir stalls, everything, the decorations, the altar, the high altar, the side altar. And to me, the most stunning feature of this, which I think is considering this was built in the 19th century, is incredibly Vatican II, is that you had two sets of statues. You had the Church Triumphant on one side. So you had all these Franciscan saints and doctors of the church, and some apostles, and they're all looking at the high altar and falling down in adoration. And then on the other side, you had housewives and farmers and businessmen and kids and
to represent
soldiers,
the church.
and basically the church on earth. You have
Yes.
the Church Triumphant, you have the church suffering, the church militant. And they're all doing the same thing. You've got the saints falling down, and you've got other people stopping, and it was stunning, even just as a work of art, because the motion implied was fall on your knees. And the whole point that they actually didn't just say nothing but the saints, you people are going to hell. But here were the saints on earth. And being given the tour, we were told by a young friar, we're going to have to rip this out. Because, well, look at this. The soldier's got a gun. We can't have a gun in church. And that housewife, well, that's awfully sexist that she's wearing an apron. And I was like, and I mean, I was a kid. I was 16 or 17 years old. And I recognized that this was something beautiful that they were destroying, and they were proud to destroy it.
Great story. And they were proud of it. Holy cow.
And I went back to my parish after saying, I'm thinking about becoming a Franciscan, Father Solanus Casey, big inspiration into my spirituality at the age of as a teenager.
Yes.
And I talked to my pastor, and he said, why don't you wait a while? What's your dad do? And I said, well, my father's an engineer. And he says, that's not a dishonest job. Go into it. It'll prepare you. Grow up a little is kind of where it came from. And so I went to engineering with a vengeance, actually. And like you pointed out, did the bachelor's, did the master's.
If we could move on to that, because I got to tell you, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I really am not. But you kind of read your resume and you go, wow. So if you don't mind, again, not to embarrass you, do me a favor, run through that, because it's really cool. I have to admit, I was taken back a little bit.
Well, no, that's all right, because I just had to tell my life story and data points to make application to the state bar exam.
Yes.
And they're like, any place you've lived for more than 3 months since you were 18. I'm 59 years old.
Yes.
Subtract 18 from that. That's 31 years. I have 31 years of addresses, and I've been a priest, and I've been in school, and I've, this parish. Well, we need you here for 6 months. on a temporary basis because father's in the hospital. We need you in this parish for 7 months because father's been sent away for treatment. And so as a young priest who, as we used to say in the Navy, semper gumby, mixture of Latin and cartoon characters, but, always be flexible, always be flexible. And so being all of this back and forth, I'm looking at 31 years. And also, freshman year stayed on campus. Sophomore year stayed in an apartment. Junior year stayed in another apartment. So I'm like, all of these different, or got a job at the university, moved back on campus. Right. And so, so I did an engineering degree, and I'm proud to say I was at General Motors Institute when it was still General Motors, and we were given, well, actually, they were opting, they were going to either give us a choice of what it said on the diploma, or they gave us a double-sided diploma, which I think is the coolest thing in the world. And the funny part is at the time, and I just ran into some folks at my new parish assignment, who's a big, long legacy family of General Motors or GMI grads. Now it's called Kettering, but in the transition, it was called GMI Engineering Management Institute, which was called.
And for the folks at home, right? That's a very impressive institution, and it was because I went to Purdue.
It was hard to get into. It was hard to get in, and it was hard to stay in. It was a work study program before there were an abundance of work study programs. Right. And you did 12 weeks of school, which basically covered 1.5 semesters of work. And then you did 12 weeks of work. And then you did 12 weeks of school, which was the other semester and a half of work. And then you did another 12 weeks. And then you had either 2, 3, or 4 weeks, depending on how the schedule and Christmas and all that stuff fell. And so, and then lather, rinse, repeat. And then you had to write a thesis as an undergraduate, which is, I guess there's still places that do that, but it was not very common then. And it's not very common now that you tell an undergraduate, write a thesis. And particularly
particularly in the sciences, right? Particularly in the engineering and the sciences, there's some liberal arts schools that require a thesis, but you don't hear much about that, do you?
Right. And in an engineering school, the premise was it was a project related to what you had been, your work.
Yes.
And I had the dubious dishonor or honor of my thesis project was on in-car reconfigurable displays, which, and to be honest with you, the bottom line was, what's wrong with knobs and buttons? You don't want to take your eyes off the road.
Fair enough.
For very long to be touch screening. And that was, they were all over a touch screen and virtual buttons and all this stuff. And I said, no. I mean, that was my thesis. My thesis thing was, don't text and drive. Only back then it was your heating and air conditioning, your radio controls were all on a screen. Now, strangely enough, my new truck, which has a screen in it, they're all buttons and knobs still. And I'm like, whether anybody was listening to, 20-some-year-old kid back in the 1980s, or they just came to the same conclusion that I did, however many years ago that was. That's, it is. I was like, I'm kind of, look at it and I go, hey, buttons and knobs. That's cool. I made that recommendation, and it was submitted to Cadillac. And so that was my thesis, was a project. What are the what ifs on putting this in a car? Now, as far as I know, it's sitting on a shelf somewhere in the library at Kettering with a 40 years of dust on it, and nobody's ever looked at it except for maybe me or my nephew or a relative or a classmate. But I kind of get a kick out of that was the musings of a 19-year-old when I'm sitting there thinking, how am I supposed to drive down the freeway and touch a screen with no feedback? Now we have tactile feedback. You have certain things, but even now, big billboards, don't text and drive.
Like without killing anybody. So that's actually very cool. So you were at GMI, and then from there, did you go? I think you worked a few years at General Motors, and then went to Purdue. What happened next?
No, I was granted a fellowship right away from General Motors, and was a GM fellow. And I went straight to Purdue.
Okay.
and then did that now, and that was, went through, did that degree, which was a lot of computers, a lot of math, simulating circuits, simulating complex electrical circuits. And that's really all that needs to be said about that, because otherwise it just gets too technical. But it was kind of the beginnings of the C language being used for that sort of thing. And then I came back to work after that, and worked at GM, where they basically just poured money over your head for sitting in an office and thinking. And did that for about 4 or 5 years, which I thought was my fair payback to GM, that I would do my best and I'd work for them. And then after 5 years, I'd find someplace else to work. And the one thing that I found disappointing was that all that research I did as an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid to write my thesis, we started farming that out. We were downsizing. We don't need our own research and engineering facility. We don't need our own design facility. We don't need, we can go to an expert and ask them to develop it.
To bring this up, this is around the early 90s, late 80s.
Late 80s, early 90s. And so GM was downsizing and farming more stuff out. They were consolidating divisions. They were, Oldsmobile. What's an Oldsmobile? And I remember driving through Lansing at the peak of Oldsmobile in the early 80s, when there were whole city blocks encompassed by, and you basically entered a new city that was Oldsmobile. And that as an employee, as a student, but a student employee of GM Research and Engineering, they had better stuff than we had. Oldsmobile was of everything. They were beyond corporate in that they were. And now look, where's Oldsmobile? Gone. And there's there's 1,000 reasons why it went wrong, but at that point they were top of the heap, and it was amazing for me going, wait, you have laptops that are military grade laptops, because nobody had a laptop in the 80s until the late 80s. I remember when I as a fellow, I was given a Compaq, COMPAQ. It looked like a sewing machine, looked like a portable sewing machine, and it weighed twice as much as a portable sewing machine. And I thought it was Star Trek. I'm like, wow. And now you have something 10 times more powerful than that in your back pocket. That's a phone, but it's a phone and so much more.
So if I could, then you went back, and then was the Navy?
Well, I took a job at Robert Bosch Corporation, where it was just a delight. 38-hour work week, more money than GM paid. World travel was just kind of implied, and I thought, boy, I can do this, and I can do this until I retire. And I loved that job. And then it was funny because, it was, of all the strange things, God called me to the Navy. And I mean, it was a result of prayer. It was a result of travel. It was a result of my frustration of trying to learn Chinese on my own.
Yes. And
so I took a trip to China and was eminently frustrated by how 2 years of, 1 day a week study with a private tutor in Chinese and buying all the Berlitz tapes and all that stuff. And I could barely say, hello, my name is. And while I was working for Robert Bosch Corporation, we had what we called winter test, and all the ABS, all the anti-lock brake companies, all the tire companies, all the traction control companies have their northern proving grounds, which for Bosch was northern Minnesota on Lake of the Woods. And up there it's 40 below all the time, at least all the time in the winter. And so you want to make an ice field, pick a field, start spraying hot water, because it's going to freeze midair. And so we would test brake systems and traction control systems and and all of that, and the anti-lock brake controllers and all this in test cars on ice. And so the strange part is here I am back from my trip to China in the summer and just frustrated with, boy, I guess it's impossible to learn this language is all I was. So I get in the car and we're driving, and we would hire local drivers because in the summer it's a tourist resort. So we were kind of providing them business in the winter because other than ice fishing, nobody really came up that way.
Fair enough. Sure.
So my driver from the airport and I are talking, and he's like, so, we're like trying to relate. And he's like, oh, he was in the Air Force and he was in there since the Korean War and all this stuff. And he says, what do you do for, oh, I went to China. I'm trying to learn Chinese. Boy, it's not that easy. He turns to me and he starts speaking Chinese. And I'm like, pinch me. I must have fallen asleep because this is too bizarre that a guy who's working, driving a station wagon from this little tiny airport to this remote airport that we use, or remote closed municipal airport that we used as for all the ice fields. And I'm like,
Mandarin.
Fluent Mandarin. That after 2 years and a trip to China, I was like, I can't do that. I knew. And I said, how did you learn? Oh, I was in the military, and they make you learn it. If you qualify, you will learn it. And like anything in the military, you have two choices: lack of ability or lack of effort. But ability, they test, so they know what you're capable of. They give you a test, and they won't let you in. And so, pretty much 99% of the time is going to be a lack of effort. And if you're not trying hard enough in the U.S. military, get ready, because they're going to find something to push you and push every one of your buttons and let you know that you can work harder than you can. And it's certainly never pleasant. So I started looking into this, and it was ridiculous. I'm like, I show up at the recruiter's office in a suit and tie, and they do their usual recruiter tricks. They're like, well, how do we know we want you? And I said, hey, you know what? That's fine. 2 degrees, working in engineering research and development. This is just a pipe dream.
Why would you want me?
And I said, why? Yeah, I said that. Why would you want me? Why would you want me? And, then they call me back, and I went through all the tests, and they're like, wow, you actually qualify. Not only for, and it's not there's in the Navy, at least in my day, you had 2 fields. You had the field of intelligence, and you had the field of cryptology. And I was in cryptology, which we won't get into the rivalry between the Intel guys and the crypto guys, but qualified for it. Then they're like, well, now you got to pass the security clearance. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to run a background check on you. Okay. You ever been arrested? Nope. Even as a juvenile? Nope. Ever done drugs? Nope. You got a drinking problem? Nope. You ever been married? Nope. You got illegitimate kids? Nope. Catholicism had prepared me, strangely enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I made it through. I made it through boot camp in my 30s. And everybody thought I was 17.
Look, yeah.
And so made it through there, went to the language school, 2 layers of language school, the practical, learning Chinese, the tactical, learning military comms in another language.
Sure.
And then what's called aircrew training, which is basically how to fall out of a plane and live over the ocean. And then
neat trick.
And then and my favorite exercise in there was called ground proofing.
Okay.
Which is how to survive drowning. I didn't like it at all. I almost flunked it. And and there's a homily in there, but I won't. I'll spare you that. But from there, I went on to survival training. What do you do if you wash on shore, and now you're Robinson Crusoe? What are you going to do?
Right.
What bugs do you eat? What leaves can you eat? What foods? What are the things you're going to come? And then at the end of all that, they throw you out in the field, as in out. They deploy you, and you train on your specific aircraft, and the next thing you know, you are sitting in the back of an aircraft with headphones on doing the mission, whatever that might be. And
Sure.
I can say I was trained in Mandarin, and I can say I flew off the coast of a country, but I can't tell you what country that was.
Yes. Yes, I understand.
And
Right.
if you press me any further, people go, you have to kill me, and I go, well, one of us is going to jail, and it ain't me.
Yeah. And so you did that. What happened after the Navy?
So after the Navy, by the grace of God, I ended up back in my old apartment. I ended up working at Ford Motor Company, and I was kind of scratching this itch of, well, maybe I should start discerning priesthood, because priesthood remained a thread through all of this.
Wow. Okay.
And I would, my social friends, a lot of them were priests, and so it kind of came and went. And I was, in a certain sense, I thought, well, doesn't look that hard. But but at this point, I'm like, well, look at what I've achieved. I've been around the world. I speak a huge quantity of a very bizarre foreign language. I've been in Asia. I've been in China, Japan, Korea, little coral reefs in the middle of the ocean that are a lot big enough for a flight line. I've been and I even remember one of my brothers saying, you got the world by the whatevers, in the sense that here you could do anything, and China is a burgeoning market for engineering and development, and all I could think of was, well, I want to be a priest, and now I'm approaching 40. What am I going to do?
Wow.
So yeah, well, so I tapped into the GI Bill and the Navy College Fund, and I started taking night school theology classes, and fell in love with theology. Fell in love with that. Started studying philosophy, and did all this on my own dime for a couple of years. And I had set a threshold. I had said, well, I have to save umpteen whatever dollars in the bank account before I feel comfortable cutting loose from a full-time job. And it was in the back of one of my notebooks, and I would just doodle and do it. And it was my daydream in meetings and seminars for work. And after about 18 months, almost 2 years, I was going over my work for the however many time, and I went, your decimal place is in the wrong point. I thought it would take me 10 years to reach the point. I needed 1 year, and I was already going on 2 years working. So I had twice what I thought was a fair amount to fall back.
Right.
Yeah. What's that?
What you thought was right now, the money you put aside, right?
Correct. My savings now were twice what I thought was a safe amount. And I went, oh, well, I guess I better look into this. And so it's not that easy for a grown man to get into seminary.
No, right.
They want the little boys. They want the starry-eyed this. They want to be able to tell you this is the real world.
Valuable.
Well, the apostles, Peter was not 16 years old.
Right.
And he was thick in the skull. Lord, it's good for us to be here. Let's build some tents. Yeah, that's exactly what the purpose was, or Jesus starts talking about the crucifixion, and Peter goes, don't talk about this stuff. You're going to chase people away. Gotta look at marketing. What? And so,
right.
these were grown men, with the exception of John, who was kind of following these old guys around. And so these were people with practical life experience. And look at what they did. Holy cow. I mean, and even Paul was a tent maker.
Yes.
So these weren't somebody who said, well, I worked at McDonald's from 16 and 17 and 18, and I want to be a priest. It's kind of like, So, but the model out there is we bring them in young, we spit them out young, we squeeze as much blood out of that turnip as we can until they're 70, and then we deal with it. So I did get into a pre-theology program. It was a strange fit. The proctors were all 19-year-old kids who were bossy little brats, really, for want of a better term. And you were like, no respect shown for anything. I even had one time I had a priest make the following comment. He goes, well, you went to engineering and you screwed up. And then you went into the Navy and you screwed up. Now you want to be a priest. Now you want to be a priest like me, and you're on the right track. And I'm like, not that he was a bad person, but that was his mindset. And I've always looked at it as, when the seminaries were not teaching philosophy, I was studying computer science and making engine controllers. No matter how much you yell at a broken software, it's not going to work. It's got to be right. Garbage in, garbage out. And it taught me logic. It taught me hard, ice cold digital logic, which is the foundation of theology, is philosophy.
Wow. Yes.
And then
what a great analogy. Yeah.
Well, and when the seminaries were saying, go out and date, how do you feel about relationships with another man? How do you feel about relationships? Go explore. And they were doing this. They can't deny that this is what was going on, because it's documented in their own student manuals.
Wow.
And at that point, I was getting the snot kicked out of me in boot camp, learning how to fall out of an airplane and not die, right, and how to handle, not only how to handle survival on the land when you wash ashore, but then there was another prong of that is, how do you survive when they catch you and throw you in a little concrete cell, or put you in a box, or pour water up your nose? When somebody asked me that during the Gulf War debacle, where they said, they're talking about waterboarding, and somebody says to me, and at this point I'm a priest, they go, Father, do you think waterboarding is torture? And my answer was, I don't know. When they did it to us, they called it training.
This is an interesting juxtaposition. I got to stop you right there, if I could, Father. This is great. So, on one hand, you have been in this world of strict, call it intellectual discipline, right?
Yeah,
it's got to add up. Call it, I don't want to say calculus. I want to say binomial equation. No matter what, one side got to come out equal to the other, or the whole thing doesn't work. End of story, right? We call that
and this is a basis of philosophy. It's called the principle of non-contradiction.
Yes.
Something either is something or it is not something.
Right.
And that's called the principle of non-contradiction. It's part of Aristotle's analytics.
Which is the beauty and majesty of the incredible philosophy and theology of the Catholic faith. Bulletproof.
Bingo.
Anyone who goes down this line, you're going bam, bam. So here you are, in all respects, an engineer and an intelligence officer who's fluent in Mandarin, yet you're walking with actually was far greater training for Catholicism than the guys running the show. Is that fair? Or am I stepping over the line?
That's how I look at it. And I look at this as well, as that St. Francis was a failed soldier.
Oh,
St.
right.
Ignatius of Loyola was a soldier.
Yep.
And you can go back through saint after saint after saint after saint. And especially when you look at some of the saints that have kind of been edited out of the calendar, St. Martin of Tours was a soldier in the Roman army. These guys knew discipline, and they applied that discipline to the faith.
Wow.
And this is where we get the great orders, the great St. Martin, and all of these things. These are people who created the foundations of our faith, not on a squishy la 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 sort of thing,
but
with on the basis of discipline. And so, in a certain sense, I kind of, I listened to what that priest said, and I thought, it's time to keep your mouth shut, Dave. Don't contradict him. You're trying to get into this thing. But I thought, I sure don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. It's not like you worked at McDonald's and it didn't work. Then you tried Dairy Queen that one summer.
Yeah,
It didn't work. So now you might be like, me, you want to be a priest, you're on the right track.
The logic
maybe that was script. Maybe that was his script. And some people are kind of, don't have a broad background, and they kind of live by scripts. But so here I enter seminary, and I'm a fish out of water.
Yeah.
And I'm accustomed to being able to speak my mind. I'm accustomed to being able to cuss and swear. I'm accustomed to basic male camaraderie within an air crew on deployments. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, you said such and such to little Jimmy and he's crying because you hurt his feelings. Now you go tell him you're sorry. And I'm like, dude, seriously, take a joke. Oh yeah. And same thing, so and so stole your car keys and took your truck out and blah blah blah. When they came back, you cussed them out. Can't do that.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
it's called Grand Theft Auto, to be technical.
Well, that's exactly. It's like, no. But see, it was always turned back on. You can't do that. You can't raise your voice. You can't say, you can't say what's right in front of you. You can't say it. And I thought, no, this is irrational. This is ridiculous. And it was mutually agreed upon that I would not continue.
I see. Okay.
Well, and so then I had no idea. I explored religious life, which was a complete and total catastrophe. If there's anything I learned from religious life is, as much as I admire men and women and priests who are living in a community setting, one thing I learned in that short period of discernment was, no matter how much I like all these people, I want my own toilet.
Fair enough.
And I mean, I hate to say that. That makes me sound like an imbecile, but I could not think that for the rest of my life and going into my age, dotage, so to speak, that I would be waiting in line to brush my teeth, that I would be waiting in line to use the lavatory, that I'd be waiting in line for a shower. And I thought, I need a little privacy. I need to function as a grown-up. So I need my own bathroom, and I can keep it clean, and I need my own quarters, and I can keep them clean. And that's fine, because a lot of, kind of one of my general observations is priests as a whole don't know how to cook, don't know how to clean, and they're accustomed to being followed around.
Yeah.
Or they live at McDonald's and their cars are full of wrappers.
Interesting.
So I, on the advice of one of my theology professors from when I was doing night school theology, he said, go to Steubenville.
So I see another degree coming in your resume.
And so now the philosophy degree is complete. So I go study theology at Steubenville.
Okay.
And in basically a year and a half, complete a degree in theology and Christian ministry. And after the first semester and the summer, as I started in January,
yeah,
I start getting phone calls from people saying, you need to meet this new bishop. And I said, who? And they said, Robert Carlson. And I said, who? Now he's retired.
Sure.
And he's still the only bishop who returns my phone calls and answers my texts. God love him. Because most of the time it's, and I can say whatever I'm thinking to him, and he won't take offense. He's never taken offense at anything I've said. And he's told me to shut up innumerable times. And he's got the guts to tell me to shut up. But they said, call him. And, I was trying to discern while I was going to Steubenville. I remember having at a discernment fair, having some guy who was probably twice my age say to me, are you looking for a student of yours or for your son? And I said, I'm looking for myself. Oh, we don't take older candidates. And I heard that 2 or 3 times, and eventually it reached a point where the smart aleck burst forth. And I said to a priest, I said, have you looked in the mirror lately? And he just was like, oh, and he turned his back on me and wouldn't talk to me. And all the while, the Franciscans of the the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculata
Okay.
were, every time I walked by, you sure you don't want to sign? We got a form for you. Sign right here. Sign right here. And I'm like, dude, I know who you are. You sleep on the floor. You eat dirt. You are the poorest. You live the life. You live the real rule of St. Francis. And I admire you.
Guys who can only eat stuff that's given to them?
Yes.
Is that those guys?
Yes.
Wow.
And they live the charism of Maximilian Kolbe.
Ah, yes. Wow, I didn't know this.
It's remarkable. But even at that age, I was starting to realize, the physical ailments of someone encroaching on their middle to late 40s.
Sure, of course.
So somebody gives me Carlson's phone number, and I stick it in between the seats in my truck. So there's a piece of paper sticking out there. And then I talk to somebody else, and they go, "Have you heard of this new bishop who's in Michigan? Bishop Carlson?" And they give me his number again. And then somebody sends me a postcard with his number on it. So I've got all of this shoved in the crack of my front seat of my pickup truck. So finally,
there's something going on here. Yeah.
Well, and I'm like, well, no, because the thing was this, as I said, it didn't quite click. And I thought, every time I try to call a bishop, I get, "Hello, bishop's office. This is Jeannie, or this is Susan." And you're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's busy right now. He's not taking calls. Perhaps he can call you in a month." And I thought, I don't want to deal with this. I dealt with it. I'd written to bishops. I try to contact bishops, and you get nothing. You get, "I work for Bishop so-and-so, and he just wants me to tell you he wishes you all the best." And I was like, I can't imagine that St. Paul or St. Peter was like, "Oh, please hold. I'm sorry, I'm unavailable right now." And so I hate to say that I had this, I won't call it idealized, but this apostolic view of the church. But I did. Sure. And even at one point, I was reading through Acts of the Apostles for a class, and roughly dead center in the Acts of the Apostles, everything for St. Paul and St. Peter goes from being, "Yay, it's all so happy and look at all the great things we're doing," to he gets the snot kicked out of him and he's left for dead. And the theologians say, was he dead, or was he left for dead? Did he rise from the dead to continue his mission, or did he just get over all those broken bones and bruises and bleeding? And it's vague. It doesn't say, even the Greek, it's hard to just figure out what went on. But Paul comes back from that and says, "It is with suffering and tribulation that we will spread the kingdom of God." And I said, that's what I want. That's what I want. And priesthood looked at that point too easy. So prior to all these,
sure,
talk to Carlson. Here's his number. And I'm like, I end up in front of the Blessed Sacrament in the middle of the night, having a conversation with Jesus. And when everybody else was gone, I walked over and I locked the door because I didn't want anybody to see me doing this. And I walked up to the tabernacle and I said, "Listen, I know how to get a college degree. I have no idea how to become a priest. And you, I believe, are the one making this, pushing this. If you want this to happen," and I'm tapping on the tabernacle, by the way. "Don't do this. Don't do this."
You wouldn't recommend this?
Well, I tell Jesus, "You have to make it happen." And I start getting the call bishop, and I said, "Oh, and don't send me a vocations director. I'm so sick of being sent down the chain of command. I want to talk to a bishop." I figured we were done. So I get 3 times Bishop Carlson's phone number. So I go, well, third time's a charm, whatever. I call. He answers. He answers on the first ring. And he says, "Is it okay if I call you back in half an hour?" And I thought, oh, here we go. This is and I go, "Yeah, sure. I'm free for the next hour. I got class after that." So 29 minutes later, he calls and he goes, "I just want to explain. I wasn't trying to blow you off," he says. "I'm in a silent retreat. And I broke silence to answer your call.
Okay.
And I had to get the permission of my spiritual director to make a phone call. And I didn't want to let you think I was going to ignore you.
Wow. Very cool.
Spiritual fatherhood, like I have never seen or found ever again.